Do you have to filter your water in Washington? Do you like have to like does your water tap water taste okay, or do you have to like put it through a filtration system?
It's acceptable. I mean, it's considered potable water, but we do buy a Brita water filter, and I don't like the taste of water in general. Chlorine water is just worse, in my opinion.
Well, Maggie and I recently stayed at we were house sitting for her parents. That'll become relevant later. And we found the water in Washington, because that's where they live, to be pretty. It's just not as good. It's like I don't know if it's chlorine or what it is, but like we come back here and I can pour it right out of the tap and drink it, and like I'm totally fine.
Yeah, well, typically people are like so afraid of what is in their water that they tend to overchlorinate it.
Mm,
And
yeah. Okay.
there's all kinds of associated problems with that, and there's all kinds of associative sort of reasons for that to be true. And it's one of those things that I guess you should just be thankful that you have any sort of water coming out of your tap because really like, the future of people of like LA and water drought and things like that, and the water demand, it's like we happen to live in a part of a country where water demand is relatively low
Hmm.
just because we live in, a sort of a coastal mountain range.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't really think about it too much other than like a blessing.
All right, fair enough. Well, I mean, obviously you use a filter, so maybe sometime you'll have to come visit me and have some of my water.
Yeah, I mean, usually it totally depends on the groundwater, but because of the way that
Ah.
people do reservoirs and water system treatment, of course, that's what Christina does. So,
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
so I've actually, know quite a bit about it.
Oh, okay. Well, we're gonna save it for another time because the thing I wanted to ask you today, before I kind of get into it, of like what happened, uh, something happened. We'll talk about that, but is like some people are afraid of heights, irrationally afraid, or they're afraid of spiders, like or like I was the example I wanted to bring up is my sister. She's deathly afraid of bees. She will run inside from any bees in the area because she's irrationally afraid. She's never been stung, so that's like why. That's why she's
It seems silly if you have never been stung
right,
that
right.
you would be,
But to her, it's perfectly acceptable. So,
right.
do you have any of these types of fears?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty natural to have like fears, but I don't know if there's
Like
any.
spiders? A spider?
Yeah, like I have my spider story, which kind of says go back to like reason of spiders, and I mean like what I think is kind of funny about that is like when you see like if you were to take like some sort of video game first person shooter perspective of like what they must encounter versus what you must encounter, like you see this tiny little black thing that's like creeping up on you. Meanwhile, what they see is this gigantic thing that can squash them with any single movement. It's like the stakes seem disproportional to that the fact that people would be afraid of spiders or bees,
Yeah,
when
they
really
should be afraid of us.
they should be afraid. They're the ones afraid of
Uh-huh,
us,
uh-huh.
But bees are just like, hey, what's going on.
Okay, so what's your spider story?
Oh, I didn't tell you my spider
I
story.
don't think so.
Okay, well, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go to like summer camp or whatnot.
No, no, I've never been. I've never been.
But you go to summer camp and you're talking about bees, and like the water fountain, because the camp was like in California, North California, and every once they have a dry summer, and of course like the water fountain would just be swarming with bees trying to get water, right?
Okay.
And so there'd always be like tons of kids that would like get stung by bees who were trying to use the water fountain because it was like in direct contention with the bees. But there's tons and tons of bugs at summer camp and everything like
Yeah, of
that.
course.
But you never really think about it, but there are bugs everywhere. And so when I got home from summer camp, I was just totally exhausted. I'd stayed up all like the previous nights, giggling with the boys in the boys' barracks rather than actually getting any real sleep, right? And so I was just like, I'm tired. My mom was like, okay, go off to bed. You're fine. And I get into bed, and I wake up a couple hours later, and the sheets are moving. And I'm like, huh, this is a very weird experience. I dreaming? I mean, I am really tired. So I kind of like, jiggle around and kind of move my head, kind of try to fall back asleep. But the sheets, I swear, they are moving. They kind of going with a flow. Like they have currents, and I'm like, oh my gosh, something's wrong. So I flip open the sheets, and up and down my body there are thousands of teeny baby
Oh
spiders
my
all
gosh.
everywhere. Okay, this is like I didn't have any brothers or sisters living with me when I was young, but that didn't keep me from wanting the top bunk of my. So I like roll off, do like a Spider-Man jump off the bed, land on the floor, and go booking towards the shower. And the shower was one of those adjoining showers. I shared it with like my parents'
Hmm.
room at the place we were living at that time. And so I was so freaked out that I ran into the door and I ran smack dab, dead center, face first into the adjoining door. And it knocked me out cold. And by this time, like all the little teeny spiders had like, vanquished,
Right, it
right?
ran away.
Like my mom finds me, my nose is bleeding, I'm out cold. She's like, "Oh my gosh, what's happened to my beautiful son?" And like I'm just totally dead out. Like I wake up, I'm in the shower. My mom's like trying to get me to come to, and she's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "The bed, the bed." It's like sort of incoherent, right? And it turns out that while I was at summer camp, not one but two spider sacks that had been unnoticed underneath my bed had basically hatched. And of course, this would have been like a kind of a problem, like had I not went to summer camp, but the nature of like the baby spiders had climbed under my sheet on thing to base for warmth or whatever, and I had this sort of thing happen. I don't know why they went under my sheets. I have to assume it was for warmth, but yeah, like quite a surprise on back at summer camp. So now I still have sort of a spider phobia to this day.
Okay, all right. So Kendall, my sister Kendall, she kind of had a smaller version of this experience, but she was deathly afraid of like all kinds of bugs when she was young. So of course, one night when she came out of her bedroom when she was supposed to be sleeping and told my mom that there's a spider in my bed. My mom was like, okay, double check and then go back to sleep, right? Because my mom basically didn't believe her because Kendall's
Okay.
so afraid of things like this. But basically, the same thing happened to you. Kendall woke up screaming, and there were several, little spiders in her bed, and
Oh.
she is not a fan. I'm pretty okay with spiders. Like, spiders don't bother me too much. They're like, I don't really like them crawling on me, but like, I'm not gonna go out of my way to avoid one either.
Right. Yeah, I've kind of like got over the irrational part of the fear a little bit. Like now if I still wake up like every once in a while, the spiders tend to like come in houses for like moisture, and when their cycle like they start looking for nests in different parts of the season, like you'll see them for like 3 months at a time and then you won't see them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because typically they want to be outdoors. But every once in a while, you might wake up in the night and like look over on your wall, and there's a spider like not a foot away from your face, and I still like get a little bit jogged to that, right? Or if I have like if a spider like crawls up my arm, I'll still do the whole like freak out where I'm like jump up and like brush myself off in a real
Uh,
like panic turi and
I
stuff like
think
that.
I think that's most people, at least a little bit. I do it a little bit, but
It's still completely irrational.
it is. Yeah, yeah.
It's the surprise factor, it's like your personal own thriller, right? It's not really the fact that you're in a scary movie. It's that you got a thrill, when some creepy crawly like got on top of you or whatever like that. But really, there are other people who just like will be like look down at their arm and brush it off nonchalantly in a totally casual way.
That's what I do most of the time,
And
probably. Yeah.
and then I have to like look over that person and be like, that guy's badass. I wish I could be like that. That bee was crawling over him, and honey badgers just didn't care. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. My mom said that she took your mom to like the Seattle Space Needle some years ago, and
Oh,
your mom
yeah.
would not go out toward the center. Like she would not leave the center because she was so scared of the height.
Which I think is weird because they've went and like to the Grand Canyon and like tall waterfalls and everything like that. Like and like she does okay. I guess she is kind of like not doesn't really want to get too close, but
Oh, it's just funny. Like everybody has their kind of thing. So what I was gonna bring up for kind of what we were gonna talk about today is that my fear. Spiders. Yeah, I'm pretty much like, okay, well maybe I'll freak out sometimes, but sometimes I was like, okay, it's a spider, and I brush it off. Bees, like we were talking earlier, not too bad. I've been stung before. It's not terrible.
yeah.
Heights. I actually recently went on a hike with some of my friends, and there was a really big drop with no rails. I got right up to the edge. I love looking down over cliffs. There's something. Do you know there's like a call of the void? Have you heard of that?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, so call of the void is like it's translated from French. There's a French name, and it's kind of like that feeling when you look over a long cliff or an edge and like you feel like you want to jump, even though
okay.
that's okay.
Right, okay.
I experience that every time I look over something tall. Like I want to jump and either fly off. Obviously, I don't have a death wish or anything, but I want to.
But you get that
off.
sort of feeling, yeah.
Yeah,
right,
yeah. Like I have yet to bungee jump or skydive, but I really want to do that. Sounds so much fun. Anyway, some people are really scared of heights. Okay, my fear is basically blood and needles. Okay,
right,
like,
right.
highly, highly irrational fear that I'm not really able to. I would say I'm not really able to control it. Like I've tried to rationalize it.
Right, yeah.
To the point where, like, one time some gory topic came up when my sister was visiting, and she knows this about me. And because siblings tend to torture each other, she went on about the topic. I can't even remember. I blacked it out. That's like how traumatized I am.
But she was getting into details.
She was getting into details, and I passed out on the couch because she was getting into it. So like this is a problem for me. Anyway. So, we are at, like I was saying earlier, would come up. We, my partner and I, Maggie, are at her parents' house sitting after like a long 2-week span of good times and quiet neighbors and no cars outside.
Right.
We kind of live in the city right now, and they live out a little ways. And we're packing up everything and putting it in the car and cleaning up the house, and the house is all clean and we're pretty much all packed up, and I decide that I'm gonna wash the last of the dishes because Maggie always does that, and there were some dishes left. I wanted to take care of them.
So you're taking your turn.
So I'm taking my turn. I'm washing a big knife, and it slips, and I slice into my finger. And I not just a little bit. I really get in there. So I kind of freak out a little bit, and I'm bleeding, and I shout for Maggie because I've not really cut myself too deep before, and luckily she knew what to do, and she got the hydrogen peroxide and the.
So was it a gusher?
No, because I held my finger together. Sorry for people who are gonna be a little grossed out. Trust me, anything you're going through, I'm going through it right now too. I'm feeling a little lightheaded. We're gonna try to talk about it today, but
that's so funny.
This is like I almost pass out, and they're like, I don't lose a lot of blood. I lose some blood, but man, I was really close to blacking out. Like the edges of my vision were dark. Maggie had to keep telling me not to hyperventilate, and I'm just totally disappointed in myself. I should just be everybody gets cut and maybe gets freaked out a little bit, but man, that was traumatizing.
Hardly life-threatening, even limb-threatening. It was
it really wasn't.
It was fine.
I can't show you viewers, but I do have a healing wound that has been healing for
Now, Did
It
it?
happened
It looks
one
like a
week ago.
fairly wide cut. So did you tear the flesh when?
No, but that's kind of how deep it was. Is that like it was a single thin blade and it
Right.
cut
Yeah.
really deep. I just bumped it. Man, that was a mistake. Um, it's still very sore.
You don't have it like in a band-aid or anything to like basically protect it or.
Yeah, I did for the last week. Like it happened right after we recorded our last podcast. Like
Oh,
right
okay.
after
Oh,
we
okay.
recorded, and like I started doing dishes, and that happened right then. Anyway, and yeah, so no, like I was almost gonna go get stitches, but like kind of after 24 hours, you're not supposed to. Like it doesn't really work because your body's
Right.
already started the healing process. And
Well, it looks like it might scar because
oh
it's
yeah, it'll
wide
scar.
enough. It's like a millimeter sort of
Wide.
2 millimeter, yeah, wide cut.
Right, and
And
that's
and
after
it,
a
it
week, so it
and it is on the round part of your finger so that you can see that it went from one
one
edge to the
side to the
other
other.
edge. Yeah, right. This is sort of ironic that you bring this up because this one is healed quite nicely, but I too have uh, recently just did like a similar cut where I was cutting through my bagel and the bread knife that we have is like very sharp and I was had it in my hand and I was sawing through it and I just went shink and it went in one side and came out the other and
Ah,
so and I was like, it was one of those cuts where you're like, oh, okay, well, that's really interesting. Like, ooh, that kind of stings and look at that. Like I went through all of the skin.
yeah. That. Oh man.
Like anytime a cut is like anatomy lesson, you're like,
No, I am not like
got
that.
got
You
through
maybe
all
are like that, and some people are like that. Like, oh, that's interesting.
got through all the skin and it's not even bleeding. Oh, there it goes. There it goes. Now it's bleeding.
No, that does not. That's not how it works with me. I'm like instantly like, this is bad. This is terrible. Oh my god. Like, so yeah. No, I first I thought I had made it all the way to the bone, and I don't know. Maybe I did. No, I didn't. It felt like it did. Man, that was really deep. And I've taken a picture like every day, and so like I think what I'm gonna do later is line up all the pictures, and you can like watch the healing process.
Right. So this is something about me and like physical damage that is atypical. I don't know if this is true with you, but I heal very, very rapidly.
I do too. I absolutely do. I heal so fast. I'm amazed. This is after a week, and it was bad. I'm gonna send you a picture later. I don't really want to put a picture up for viewers because you don't want to see it. But like, if you look at it, you can like
Some
see
people
in.
have that sort of like, they actually go. I mean, there are some people out there who are like looking at gory pictures on the internet for purpose. It comes in all kinds. You know what I'm saying?
If those people are listening right now, I too bad. I'm not gonna show you a picture of my
You're like,
nasty wound.
I'm not gonna feed your gory
Yeah.
desires.
Yeah, so I just took the band-aid off basically yesterday because it was finally like
Sealed.
scabbing and yeah, sealed. But my finger's still very sore and it's kind of purple still. And
Yeah, my cut was not nearly as bad as that, but what I have noticed is that I tend to heal about 3 times as fast as the average person.
I
Like,
think I do too. I think I heal really quickly. I was so confused because like the third day I was like, how can this be okay? It was so, maybe it's just my bias of having terrible bad fear of wounds and things, but like I thought I was like
well, like
healing really
a
quickly.
cut on Christina will like last, much longer than it will on me, and the same is true with like Jeremiah and like
Yeah, awesome genes.
I don't
Yeah.
know. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we have the best genes ever.
Well, I don't like. There's another thing. I was like, I heal really quickly, and I don't get sick very often.
I don't even remember the last time I got sick. I don't even remember. Years ago. It must have been years ago.
I know, and other people just don't have that sort of fortune.
The last time I like threw up was like 3 years ago in college when after a weekend of not drinking, my friends threw up while they were okay, I just want to set the stage for you. They decided to have a party at our house and they drank a lot and I was like, I'm not really feeling it today. I don't really want to get anywhere close to like nausea level. both my roommates who were dudes, they got sick and puked. Later that weekend, we went to the coast, and on the way back, I got a bag of M&Ms. I love peanut M&Ms.
Uh-huh.
And we got home, and something was bad about those M&Ms because I threw up, and I was just thinking, this is not justice. I am responsible, and I don't drink, and I still get punished. What the heck?
It's like it was you had the the M&Ms and the recent memory of them drinking to
Yeah.
sort of serve as a counterpoint for the different
Yeah.
reasons that people get sick. I do
Yeah.
have to say that's kind of
This is also we're sidetracking a little bit, but this happens to me because I don't really drink that often. I tend to like be cautious about that kind of thing. Once again, Maggie goes out one weekend with friends. She goes out to the bars. I decide, not for me tonight. She gets drunk. She loses her ID at the bar. Like, she loses it. They didn't have it the next day.
yeah.
She comes home and gets sick. Later that weekend, I get sick because of, like, I think it's food poisoning again.
Yeah.
And I'm, like, in a daze. We go to the movies. I leave my wallet and lose my ID. And then I go home and I get sick. And, like, both of these times, I'm like, I was doing the responsible thing. This isn't fair.
Like there's some sort of like superstitious thing of like where you will suffer the same fate as like,
It's like those around me. Because, like, oh my god.
well, then I should win the lotto.
Yeah, please, by all means. I'm fine with that. We win-win.
I'll win the lotto and be like, okay, I won the lotto. Go buy a ticket.
Anyway, but yeah, I think I've got a pretty good immune system. Like, besides those couple times when I got sick from food poisoning, like, I have not been sick at all.
Like, yeah, naturally the thing. Yeah, as far as like gory things go, like, it doesn't really bother me. And there are a lot of people who have an irrational fear of needles when.
Oh yeah, that's me. All the way.
I've had enough shots to know that really it kind of depends on where they're giving the shot and like who's giving the shot, because there are basically ways of like you don't really have so many nerve clusters that every time that you get a shot you're going to totally feel it. Like there are ways to avoid nerves to the point where you don't really feel it.
This is like
just even the mental pictures are bothering you.
I wish I had something to like keep track of how blushed or how flushed I am in the face, because when we talk about this stuff, if you talk about this stuff with me in person, you can watch my face go from like regular to really white.
You tend to get all crunched up. You're like, oh my gosh,
yes,
it's all going badly.
I'm being physically affected, but I move on for you listeners. We're gonna get through this topic. So yeah, no, I was like sick from unrelated. It wasn't like flu sick or anything like that, but in middle school, and I had to go through a bunch of blood tests to the point where it was like in a 3-month period I had to get like 14 blood tests. So it's like
that's a lot.
It's like one every how much is that? One every 4 days, something like that. Anyway, that is probably the cause of this because man, that sucked. Really
yeah bad. It is kind of interesting that like, you know, things that happen like in your sort of early teenage years and sort of your formative periods will tend to stick with you for, you know, a really long period of time.
Well, that's like what Freud's whole thing is, right? Which some of that is true, and he was kind of the first one to say it and write it down and say like, "Oh, this is a phenomenon." But like, I mean, I just want to say that I think most of Freud's stuff is crap, even though he's like, you know, supposed to be transformative for the particular subject. I think most of his theories are total BS and like.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, no, it tends to be true that like you can look at some of the more strong things about you and go, that's kind of relates back to my childhood.
Yeah. I don't really have too much stuff with gore now. I did, this is like several years ago. I don't even think they did it, but I lived next to a university, and they had sort of like before really online courses were a thing, they would basically videotape their medical procedures that they were doing to like teach new medical students procedures and things like that.
Gross.
And so, I watched them while they did like liposuction
Gross.
and did all kinds of like hip replacements and like just all kinds of different surgeries. But I finally stopped watching when they did a brain surgery.
Or does that bother you?
Yeah, because the way that they did it is that they cut the flap of skin and out behind the ear, and they peeled it back, and
Uh-huh.
then they take a drill, and like for that particular procedure, they had to like drill through the skull to get to the brain, and sort of there's all kinds of bone dust and everything like that.
This kind of description doesn't bother me too much because I can just pretend it's not true. But like when you put it in front of me, it's kind of like on a surgery show. If you watch like a surgery show,
Yeah.
and they cover up everything but the guts, and you can just like, okay, there's like a heart in there, or like they're, maybe they're down by the liver. Okay, like I'm totally fine because there's no context. I'm just like, oh look, it's just like discombobulated guts, and like it
Yeah,
totally doesn't
right.
bother me at all. But as soon as you provide some context and I can see it, like if you're like, okay, here's the liver, and look, that guy's hand is right there, like next to his next to the opening, then I'm like, okay, this is not okay.
Like the historical photos of like they would have like the Civil War where you see the all the corpses littering the ground sort of thing. That's pretty bad for you, or
No, no, because they're already dead, and like I'm okay with that. Okay, they're dead, they're gone. That's fine. It's when they're like, I guess it's when they're alive and the blood is gushing out, and I'm like, oh man, that's terrible. Okay, so anyway, the bone dust. That's what you're saying.
oh yeah, yeah. But like that particular, I like watched that show pretty faithfully until they did the brain surgery, and like that one I felt was like just highly disturbing, just because of like I would say the context, because they basically didn't have they had like the front of his face in restraint, but they didn't. You basically got to see him, like while they
Yeah,
did it because of his thing,
yeah,
and
that's no good.
just the nature of the surgery itself was just really highly disturbing,
Yeah,
and
that's no good.
so I didn't really watch that show.
So yeah, I was thinking about like transformative childhood things that affect you later, and like Harry Potter happens to be one of those things for me. I think it was really affected my later years just based on that I read it so much as a child. And Freud got a lot of things wrong, but it's like one of those things. It's just like we kind of accept as true in our culture.
Yeah, I guess I don't really see like Freud as like he may have been like like a very important figure to like start looking at childhood experiences and how they like impact later life, but I don't think of him as the expert. But I don't really know very much about like the psychological discovery people, like the people who were the forerunners to like psychological thought as it was today.
Yeah, okay. Like, I don't really think it's that useful. I mean, like, I understand that like some things about psychology are useful a little bit, but for the most part, it's not like useful in telling you anything about humans. You can look at a case study and be like, oh, this human acted this way, or like this human acted this way, but it's not until you get like a large group of people and see what they do on like a large scale that you can actually measure at data and like look at patterns, because each individual is so completely different. So like I feel like almost completely the field of psychology is not a useful one to study. The more useful thing would be sociology, because it's very related, still tells you about human
Yeah.
nature, and like you can draw actual conclusions, especially like scientific conclusions from it.
So I have a problem with, I guess, psychology on a macro and micro scale, which is that it's one of those things where like we talk about like discoveries when we did
Oh,
when
like
we
in math and things.
like where we've discovered like the electron. Well, it's like
Or we discovered a black hole, that type of thing.
right, and it's kind of like one of those things where it's just like the black hole was always there, the electron always existed, and so I guess you could say that the fact that human beings have discovered this thing is accurate, but it's not like those things didn't exist beforehand. And it's just like people and people relations have been around for, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So when they talk about psychological discoveries, it's not like as if that thing was unknown. It just happens to be that someone is basically taking
Written it
credit.
down.
Right. They've had some sort of insight, they've had an epiphany, and now they're going to take credit for that epiphany or that insight, which nobody else in the history of mankind has yet deemed important enough to like say, no, no, this is my discovery. Even though it's probably something that has already been known by some housewife or some king or some other like ruler
Right,
or
so just some person in
right
general.
in the past. So it is a little bit, yeah,
Yeah, like
it's
I think you're totally right. Like even though back in the day, you had some people who didn't write down their every thought, or like they did, but there are people out there who knew things about the world. Like there's no doubt about that, or about human nature. They're like, wow, people tend to like go back to their childhood when they as they're an adult. They tend to like have things that have happened to them. It happens to affect them.
and people have always talked about like how important it is to like raise your children and what effect like raising your children would be like having in their life. And so it's hardly like new news like now, even now that we're doing like child studies from like the 1960s and on. It's like half of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff is already sort of like, yeah, duh, we already knew that, because like they went and sought a conclusion that was already sort of in human knowledge in general, right? Now,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that there are important things that like, psychology can tell you as far as its application in like sociological studies, which is basically what you're saying. And I do think that that is valuable, but I have a problem with a lot of the sort of accreditation to psychological studies that like if you look at like pastorals about human relationships, it's just like once upon a time, if you were distressed or you needed therapy, you went and saw like the church pastor, and you'd say, "Hey, pastor, I've been having this problem." And of course, your pastor would probably give you some sort of half cobbled up stuff that had to relate to the Bible, but some other pastors were just going to be very, very human. It kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
depended on your pastor. But the natural mechanisms that we had in the past, where people, if you were just being totally off base, where you're like, uh, let's say you're like younger and you're blaming your mother for all of your current woes. At one point in history, there would be a person in your life that would basically be like, you need to get your stuff together and stop blaming your
Right.
mother and get
Yeah.
on your own feet, that sort of thing. And so we've sort of replaced a lot of the historical things with the idea of like a therapist or a psychologist. But the problem is that now they are somehow like the gatekeepers of human truth with the accreditation
Uh,
system that I have a problem with now.
I don't know about that. Like, I think if it, like, I've never been to a psychologist or anything, but like, I don't think that's the like
It's
generally
not.
how people who actually go to psychologists feel about it. They feel more like it's just somebody who's kind of helping them.
Yeah, no, it's not really. It's not something you'd find in your therapist. It's really more something that you'll find in sort of governmental institutions where they're just like, well, you don't really know what's good for your child. You're not a psychologist, right? We have to like send your child to like a psychologist to know whether or not we're doing our class well, or whether they have ADD. Or it's basically usually found in the worst case scenarios when you're talking about children and children development, and basically you have a conflict between institutions and parenting, or basically you have neglectful parents, and they're
Just
kind of like trying to justify their actions, right?
right.
So I've run into like some kind of things where the accreditation process is, I find this is very true with like ageism or experience, where people will discount sort of the wisdom of a 5-year-old. And it's kind of like your 5-year-olds have like interesting perspective. Young children, like they say things that they will observe the sort of truth of the world, like such as it is, and such a
Yeah.
perspective that they say things, and that's like totally funny, like I.
Yeah, and true, and totally true.
Right, right. And it's just like one of those things where, like, you have to basically allow the fact that, yeah, like, someone doesn't necessarily have to have a degree in psychology to say something truthful about human nature.
Right, right. Now, I think that like some psychologists are, of course, trained in like diagnosing certain things, and I think that is a little somewhat valuable because there are people who like are genuinely,
Well,
like
if
mentally
people are
ill or
bipolar or,
right,
yeah.
and we have figured out ways to basically, give them chemicals inside a pill that can genuinely help them, and like that's a valuable thing to have. But yeah, the field itself, I'm like, this is not super useful. Like, let's think about all of the tiny little human nuances. Now, I'd rather hear from a 5-year-old that wow, you're tall, and it's like, oh yeah, I am tall. Like kids have that kind of observation, like they'll just say anything because they don't know any better. Quote better. I don't even know if they know better.
I'll tell
but
you a story. I was at a
I
friend's
love
house
stories.
playing magic cards, and this little girl, she comes out, and we're just sitting around, and she's kind of like, do, we're doing our thing, but like she's kind of included at the table, but she's not really playing magic cards because we were playing magic at the time. She looks at me and she says, "You know what?" I was like, "What?" "Pooh is like Play-Doh." And I'm like, well, I have to say that poo is kind of like Play-Doh. It's malleable, and you can make shapes out of it, and has the same consistency. But there are a few reasons why you would not treat poo like Play-Doh. And so we basically had like sort of this pseudo discussion about how poo was like Play-Doh and how poo was not like Play-Doh. But it's kind of, but it's kind of like one of those things where like, like the kid was like spot on. Yeah, it has kind of the same texture and consistency and adhesiveness as Play-Doh, and it just
Oh,
like.
that's gross. But yeah, the kids is like, oh, this just wow. I draw you draw this similarity, and you're like, things you discover as a kid. You're like, wow, this is like almost the same.
Yeah,
And then as an adult, you just don't think that at all.
yeah,
You're like,
you're
no,
not.
they're not the same.
While you might have a 4-year-old girl say poo is like Play-Doh, and you'd be like, yeah, it kind of is, but there are reasons why you would not play with it, because there are some things about poo that aren't like Play-Doh, and you go into discussion. But the thing is that you would never run into like an 18-year-old person going, oh, poo is like Play-Doh, unless of course they were kind of being sort of facetiously obnoxious, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where like so as a field of study, okay, for psychology, I actually think that it's actually quite valuable. The problem that I have with it,
Yeah.
the problem that I have with it currently right now is the idea of the accreditation.
What you're saying earlier about discovery of ideas.
Well, or that like somehow some other people are more entitled to have an opinion about it than others, or basically to have insight in others, because there are some things that like there are two basically social studies right now that they teach in university, and they treat them like academic subjects, but the fact is that they're not truly academic, because everybody has to deal with them, and everybody has to sort of formulate their own basis for it. And one would be psychology, and the way that you deal with emotions and the way they affect you and the way they affect other people. What you're going to do about something who is suffering, whether how you're going to like, basically assert, a kind word to influence somebody's emotions, right? Who's maybe down on
Who
their
needs it?
down on
Okay,
their
yeah.
luck, right? Like psychology is something that you basically use every day of your life, because we all have basically social relations, right? And all of that comes down to like sort of some sort of psychological interaction where you're basically giving some sort of positive or negative feedback to the person, right? So it's truly not a subject that is actually academic. Like you can study it in an academic way, but
That's not useful to do.
you're going to be using it every day of your life for the rest of your life. Children use it when they're like, "Oh, I've upset mommy by breaking the dish. Something is about this that I don't want to do this to upset mommy." It's like kids learn psychology like from day one, and we continue to learn it like more and more as we grow older. So it's not really an academic subject per se. That means that everybody who has like their 2 cents to basically give, or their own insights to give, can basically draw upon their own experiences on basically how people deal with emotions, suffering, anger, joy, passion, motivation. It's not something that can be quantified into like some sort of book
Box. Yeah.
and
I totally
say,
agree.
this is the state of the human mind,
Right.
because that's not really true. And the other one would,
Sorry to all the psychologists out there to probably not burst your bubble, but actually probably just make you upset that we're bashing your topic.
it's not really bashing if you can basically sit down and take sort of a look to say that, it's true that even anyone who's never ever met a psychologist or never met a therapist, and there are thousands of people who that is true, like tribal Africa, dense populations of India, some sort of rural village in China, they've not met a psychologist, they've not met a therapist or anything like that. But that saying, psychology is still true for them. Human nature
Hmm.
still has impact upon them, whether or not they ever had psychologists at all. And really, psychology is a brand new field. Doesn't matter that it didn't exist thousands of years ago, and that people 1,000 years ago didn't have psychological insights.
Right.
It's
Right.
like we're treating psychology as if it's like some sort of brand new field of discovery. And we're just like, you know,
No, we're not. Well, so like you were saying that human nature based on experience, you kind of like learn things over time based on experience. So does that lead you to the conclusion of believing that the older you are, basically the more you know, and so you have kind of a better right to, you were talking about ageism earlier,
yeah.
a more of a right to basically say, or like your opinion should be valued more.
So there is a value in experience, okay? And I think that old people can have potentially some of the highest value of basically beings because they have experienced a lot. But the thing is that not everyone. This is one of those kind of sad facts. Is that, I mean, this is kind of true with me as like as a health-wise, so that at some point I leave a sort of a cloistered existence, right? So the fact is that there are people out here that will be younger than me who will basically experience more in life than someone who like necessarily goes and does the same job for 30 years, right?
Okay, but I think that there's also something about uh not just the amount of human interaction you get, but actually how, like, what kind of person you are and how you can take some of the experiences or even like logic and apply them in different ways,
Yeah, there's a
and
growth
be
process.
young, right, and be young and know more than old people. Like I've talked to other people about this, that if that were true, if experience were the end
Yeah.
all old people would agree, right? They would agree on everything because they've had the experience in their life to, like, oh, I know because I've lived longer, and all the old people agree. That would definitely say something about
Well, the
like
thing is that like
experience.
there are a lot of old people that end up being very similar in the way that they interact with the world, in the sense that they kind of
That's
like take a
true. That's
hands-off
true.
sort of experience, and they're very laid back and they're not very stressed because they've kind
They've
of,
experienced the stress already.
yeah, they're kind of like, well, it's not going to get any worse sort of thing. And so old people do have this other thing, but like, no, I'm not saying that old people are going to be the wisest people. That's not quite
Hmm.
what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that they potentially could be the wisest people.
Yeah, but like you were saying earlier, potentially you could have a 5-year-old be the wisest person. Well, not wisest, but they have nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like a 5-year-old could basically say something that is so purely true that you just have to basically
It's like, wow,
give it up to the
that is
five
true.
year old, right? Yeah.
Right. Like you hear about, I've heard about stories of, people who are fat, or they're overweight, and the 5-year-old or will go up to them and be like, "Wow, you're fat," and they're like, "Yeah, I am." Like, that is a thing that's true. I'm like,
Yeah, social etiquette, we typically do not point out what could be considered faults in others. If like consider currently, people who are fat or obese or held, that's like a downer or something like that. So like
Yeah.
a child doesn't really have that sort of preconception that
Right.
this associative thing would be bad, and so they don't have any problem telling you that you're fat or
Or that, yeah, you look
yeah,
funny
like
or something.
or
Yeah.
you look funny or you're ugly, and like they haven't necessarily sometimes they haven't really related to like ugly as being bad or funny looking as being sort of negative context. Like they haven't added that negative or positive context, right?
Right.
So and like they'll see, like it's kind of like the natural sort of thing of like if like you see like a double amputee or something, the child will be like, "What happened to your legs?" And
Right.
it might be a horrific and painful story for this man who's sitting on the street homeless, who's a double amputee. But to the
Hmm.
child, they're just like
Like, what? This is a new thing. Like, I've never experienced this.
right.
Right.
And so there's a sort of beauty in the innocence, but yet like they haven't really gone to the thing.
I think that, like, it's pretty. I think it's okay to have both stages of, like, okay, you have like the young kid who doesn't know any better and just kind of asks, and that's like everybody kind of just expects that and accepts that. And then you have like the later where I think we're a little more sensitive to, like, oh, you're fat, oh, you're missing limbs. Like, you don't really need to point that out at this point because they probably know, they probably are aware that they don't have any limbs or that they're overweight, and
Well,
like that's okay to not point that out.
I think it's unfortunate in the sense that curiosity tends to take a dive when you realize that your curiosity can basically have a negative impact on someone else.
Oh, that's totally true. I don't ask things of people all the time. Well, I
Right.
mean, partially it's none of my business. It doesn't really affect me in
Yeah,
matter,
that's I
but
mean that's why you basically when your kid goes up to like the paraplegic guy and asks him where his legs, you go you'll have parents basically say, Amanda, come here, don't ask that person, like just leave him alone, he's
hmm
okay, and parents don't really particularly know what to do in those kind of situations. And
I feel like if it were me, I would always want to say something like witty. What happened to your limbs? Oh, I left them at my house today. I decided to go without them.
what's funny is that you'll run into people who do that kind of
Right,
thing.
right, right. And I think that's like the best approach to things like that is because making light of something serious is like super positive. That's what I love about humor is like let's make fun of everything.
Well, it's one of those things is that you don't want your kids to think that legs are somehow detachable and that everybody who loses legs it's like fine. So there is the sort of thing where
Okay, but
you want to have like the discussion where kids aren't being like, where like you hear about like some guy who got ran over by a train and his legs were crushed and the little girl turns to you and be like, "Well, now he can have detachable legs."
well, okay, yeah, but for the most part, when they make a joke like that, the kid, I think, mostly understands that legs
I
aren't detachable.
No, I'd like, like it becomes like some sort of thing. Be like, well, my legs aren't detachable. Mommy, are your legs detachable? That's the kind
Uh,
of weird conversation you'd have with a kid. Is that your kid's sitting in a car, you're going down the road listening to the wheels on the bus, and suddenly your kid be like, "Mommy, are your legs detachable?" Be like, "No, my legs are not detachable." And you're sitting there as a parent going, "Where did this conversation come from?"
I'm all about the weird conversations having with kids, like, or anybody. Weird conversations. I'm pro weird conversations.
Yeah, but getting back to like your age thing, um, the problem I see with like part of like age is that even though you have a higher chance to basically have more time to go through a developmental process and you have more time to experience a lot of different views and opinions and new things and basically formulate like new ideas, we typically don't. You know,
Right, you get to a certain age and then you're like, oh well, I'm done like developing opinions.
people when they're old, they get set in their ways.
Yeah.
They start living like more simple lives where they're not trying to go out and like experience some things. Like it would be
Yeah.
great if like the sort of rate of self progression would continue. But the thing is that a lot of people abandon it. Now I don't. I'm older, but I kind of see myself as I still basically try to look at like my flaws, and I still try to like, read up on things that are happening in the world and make some sort of like, like
Judgment call.
are there ways to basically make the world a better place, or what's my own place in
In
throwing
society
disposable
and
diapers
life.
in the thing, or like, am I going to be doing that, or should I be throwing away this water bottle, or recycling it? Should I even be using a water bottle? But
I think you should do that. Everybody should definitely do that. Like no matter what your age is. I know
yeah,
at some point you just feel like, wow, this is like too much effort. But I mean,
I mean,
I
if you
I hope I never get that way.
think of how many old people who do not basically interact with computers and the internet, because it was like something that's really like a new confusing tool,
This blows my mind.
and they don't want to take, like, they don't want to get over the learning hump, because it's harder for them to learn, and it's harder for them to like remember and get into. And
I know this is crazy that
but it's like
this very thing,
it's like an
like
amazing thing. Yeah.
old people don't like understand computers, or like it's less that they don't understand, because like if you don't understand something, okay, and you can't learn it as easy, great, that's fine, and then you struggle. But giving up on it, even though like the internet, oh, it's amazing, the internet is amazing, there's so much information and it's so valuable. How could you just throw that away like, well, my life is good enough, like, I don't care how old you are.
What bothers me is that there's several old people who basically don't see the value in it. They're just like, my value is my farm and my truck and my children around me, and
There is value in that.
that's what's truly valuable in life. And
That's great.
maybe
That's
that's
true.
maybe
That's
maybe
true.
that's perspective. But the thing is that you can't say that like having like all human knowledge contained basically in this box is not valuable, right? It's just like
Yeah.
whenever I go to do like, do it yourself project or home improvement projects, the fact that I
The
can get on the
internet.
internet basically means that I can draw upon other people's experience. I don't have to sit there like a flubber hand and not know what I'm going to be doing when I go to like
Right.
try to
Or you
change
have to
plumbing.
hire somebody, or have to like maybe ask a more experienced person. You don't have to do that.
It can basically save you like resources or independent, or you can basically grow as a person. Basically, you know what? I'm gonna go install that attic fan, or I'm gonna do my kitchen plumbing, and
Which you've done. You've done those
yes,
things.
it's an enriching process, because you've taken your life and you've taken control of it, and you've like made it better, and like you're not just paying, you're saving resources by not paying someone else to do it.
Right.
And it's just like one of those things where like I often think of like how, like there are several old people who live very kind of unfortunate lives, in the sense that like they don't know that you can have your groceries delivered, and so they live through like a very harrowing
Mm.
process where they endanger themselves and others by getting in the car and going to the grocery store or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, like it, and you could find that out. You
Right, and
could.
you can use
It
the internet.
exists.
You're right, you can use the internet to basically get yourself on some sort of like, program or grocery delivery program. And meanwhile, it doesn't mean that you have to be isolating yourself. You could basically get on the internet and figure out how to, ride public transportation that is available in many cities.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you live in Timbuktu, then it's probably okay to be an old person, get in the car, because you're not really going to endanger that many people on your 20-minute drive from, fuck nowhere to, fuck nowhere. Like, that's not really
Right.
danger.
But that's not the same thing as like actually being in a city and going and driving to the grocery store, when you could actually have it delivered. There are programs out there that are not internet, but well, they're not like specifically internet based that like do delivery. But yeah, most of the time they just don't know.
Yeah, it's like there's one of those things is that you could possibly, if you're older and you're finding that your independence is starting to go down because of your capabilities as like age, you could possibly use the internet to
To
regain
your
that
advantage.
independence,
Yeah,
right? Keep
absolutely.
keep
Yeah.
mobile, keep active, use it as
Hey,
a
you know
social
what?
tool. And,
Even I have been considering some kind of grocery delivery system, because I don't really like doing that. I mean, like, I just need the food. Most of the time, I go as quickly as I can, and I have a plan beforehand. I'm like, all right, I need to go. Like, and the particular grocery store that I go to, I know it already. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go like this around the grocery store. I'm going to get this, and I'm going to get out. And like, there's minor fees involved with getting your groceries delivered. And so like, I've been doing some research on it. It's like, seems like a Seems like a pretty handy thing.
Well, if you can utilize it, I do think, like, especially if you're sometimes like the time that you would take and the gas you would take and the resource take, especially like this is what I
It's
found.
almost the same, yeah.
When I was living in the city, there are people who lived far enough from the grocery store that they'd have to drive to the grocery store. But not all grocery stores basically provided free parking. And so they'd have to pay for parking to go to the grocery store.
Wait, when was this?
This is when I was living in Queen Anne in Seattle. Queen Anne is a neighborhood of North Seattle.
That is really bizarre. It must have been like because I see. It was because it's in the city.
Yeah, there's no place
right.
for parking, right? It's like downtown.
Right,
So
right.
either
right.
you have to walk or usually it's in any walk over 2 miles is actually pretty difficult if you're going to have a handful of groceries and milk and stuff like that. It becomes like a challenge that's not really worth having. And the grocery store I went to had validation parking where you would go into it, and once you got your receipt, you'd keep your receipt, and when you went to drive out of the grocery store driveway, you showed that you made a purchase over $5 on your receipt, and you were able to take off without paying. Like, they wouldn't allow you just to buy gum or something and get validated parking. But there was a couple other people I knew, like, that lived on Beacon Hill and on the other side of Queen Anne, the east side of Queen Anne, and their grocery stores didn't have free parking, so that they'd have to pay like $5 to go get groceries basically to park.
So the delivery would be extra worth it for them,
Right,
because they'd have to.
Yeah, at that point you'd really have to question whether or not you should just get them delivered, because that's probably the same cost.
I was thinking about that the earlier. This is kind of related. If you go to the grocery store and get diapers, you were saying earlier that you were thinking about whether you're a good person or not, whether you should use disposable diapers or not. The water bottle thing is one thing, right? Don't throw away water bottles. Definitely reuse them. That's a terrible thing. Don't use plastic. Okay, like, that's bad. Diapers are another story. If you're going to, if you're gonna use non-disposable diapers, you're gonna try like cloth diapers. I hope the figurative God has mercy on your soul. That you don't do that. Just throw away the diapers. Let the environment take the damage, and don't have poop all over the place. It isn't Play-Doh. How much ever we might want it to be Play-Doh, it's not Play-Doh.
No, I'm not convinced. It's just like, for thousands of years we didn't have disposable diapers.
And it was disgusting.
And it was disgusting, but it was completely doable. The thing
But
is
it was
that, like,
disgusting.
yeah, like I was talking to my mom, like what like they did with like before disposable diapers, and
Died.
it was pretty bad. Like, I could talk about it a little bit if you want, but
You know what? I think we should stop there.
okay.
Because we already got past the gore. Let's not go back to poo. Even though we touched on it with Play-Doh, at least we weren't specific.
No.
All right. So thanks for listening, guys.
Yes, thank you.
This has been a Gravity Well podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a lovely day. We'll see you next time.